Well, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of New Democrats, I want to speak and actually talk to the point that we're dealing with here today and what we dealt with yesterday, and that is both the issues of the concurrence votes on estimates and on the supply motion that's before us today. To listen to the Conservatives, they say this is a prime opportunity.
The member from Nepean-Carleton and her group, we just listened intently to your presentation, and I think now it would be nice of you to give respect to the member from Timmins James Bay. So if you want to have your little conference, take it outside. Continue.
Well, as I was saying, Mr. Speaker, this debate is about supply and about concurrences that have been before the House. And to listen to the Conservatives speak, they say, oh, this is a real opportunity for all of us in the opposition to gang together and to bring the government down and to have an election. Well, listen, there may very well be an election in this province, but the province of Ontario needs the authority to pay the bills. These Tea Party Republicans, the Conservative Party of Ontario, quite frankly, are taking a book out of the Republican playbook of the United States. They're saying, let's take Ontario and push it over the fiscal cliff and then have an election. Well, can you imagine what would happen if we actually did what Tim Hudak wants? We would be in a situation, as of the vote yesterday, for the province of Ontario to have lost the authority to pay the bills. That means to say air ambulances wouldn't fly. That means to say ambulances would close. That means to say Elections Ontario couldn't even run the darn election. So what kind of plan does Tim Hudak have? It's more of the same. It's what Tim Hudak has been doing for the last 2.5 years. He comes into this minority parliament as the party who's in the best position to be able to influence the government in a minority parliament, and he says, you know what? I'm dealing myself out. I'm going to be the oppositional leader who doesn't propose anything and who just stands on the sideline and swipes at the government, swipes at the opposition NDP, and does what they've been doing for 2.5 years. And I think Ontarians are starting to understand. If New Democrats won by-elections in places like Waterloo and London and Windsor and recently in Niagara Falls, it has to do with the public have looked at what Tim Hudak is doing and they're saying, I'm not buying it. The public understands, as we do and Conservatives agree, that there is a displeasure in the Liberal government. We all understand they've done a bunch of things that we're really not happy with, everything from the energy file where they stole the Conservative plan to deregulate and privatize hydro, then the Liberals did it themselves. We understand that there's issues, but there's a time and a place to deal with it. And for Ontario to be in a position as of yesterday to have not had the ability to pay the bills, I say to Tim Hudak and the Conservatives, I just don't know where you guys are coming from, other than saying you're a bunch of Tea Party Republicans who are taking your plays out of Mitt Romney and others in the Congress of the United States and have decided to try to push Ontario over the fiscal cliff. There is a responsibility with being elected. There's a responsibility that the public puts onto us as elected members to do what is right in this legislature. There are times to be hyper-partisan. I get it. We all do it, from the government side to the opposition side. There are times to propose and there are times to oppose. But this is not a time to oppose. This is a supply motion. So let's be clear about what this means. If we were to listen to Tim Hudak and we were today to vote down the supply motion, as of the time of the vote, Ontario would lose the ability to pay the bills. That means that there would be no authority. Well, see, my learned friend from the Conservative caucus says I'm wrong. Go and check the standing orders and go and check the precedents. What happens when you vote down a supply bill? The government loses the authority to pay the bills. It means to say all of Ontario would shut down because this legislature would not give the authority to the government of Ontario to pay the bills. Then they would say, well, you know, we just have to go to the Lieutenant Governor, and the Lieutenant Governor would issue a warrant in order to pay the bills. We don't have to worry about that. Do you think for 1 minute that the Lieutenant Governor, once this House votes by majority to turn down the supply motion or to turn down concurrences, would all of a sudden undo the mess that this House created? The Lieutenant Governor is not the one to make that decision. It is this legislature that makes this decision. And for the Conservatives under Tim Hudak to all of a sudden try to make it pretend as if this is another opportunity in order to bring down the Liberal government and that we're propping up the Liberals is preposterous. You know what I'm upset about? We're propping up...
Member from Renfrew, I guess you were ignoring me. Twice I asked you to keep it down. Continue.
So I say, Mr. Speaker, really the question here is we're propping up Tim Hudak's bad leadership. That's what the Conservatives are asking us to do. A leader with, I think, with a sense of common sense, something that I thought the Tories really believed in, would understand the difference between voting down a throne speech and voting down a budget. When it comes to supply and concurrence, it means to say you've lost the authority to spend the money and to pay the bills of the province of Ontario. And I think Conservatives, who are supposed to be the party who understand fiscal matters and are supposed to be the ones who really get the economy, would be the first ones to figure out you cannot throw this province into a fiscal cliff. It makes absolutely no sense. And the Tories are doing what the Tories do best, and what Tim Hudak has learned over the 2.5 years here. They've decided that they are not going to in any way recognize what the people of Ontario told us in the last election. And that is, we are not giving the government a majority. We're creating a minority parliament. We want people to come into this legislature and take their responsibilities seriously, to oppose when necessary, to propose when it's right, and always to remember what's important to the people back home. And for Tim Hudak to all of a sudden say that voting this down would just cause an election and would have no consequence whatsoever onto what happens in Ontario is preposterous. The rules are clear. This is a supply bill. If the House votes down supply, it means to say the government loses the authority to pay the bills. That means to say the jails close down, the hospitals close down, much in the way of our provincial transportation system closed down, hospitals, education, and the rest. And I don't believe that's what Ontarians want. Some Ontarians, and I would agree probably a majority, are very upset with this government. I get that. But what they don't want is for all of us here in this legislature to play games, create a fiscal crisis in order to have a provincial election, and have nobody have the ability to get provincial services until such time that a new government would be formed. Because the reality is it would probably take about 60 days for all of that to happen. By the time you have an election, by the time you gazette the members and have the members reported into the House, by the time you have a throne speech, and by the time you can reintroduce the Supply Act, you're probably talking about 60 days. So can we really afford in this province to shut down all government services that the province of Ontario gives for 60 days? My Aunt Doris just died 2 days ago. Unfortunately, she died in the United States. Well, unfortunately, she died, but she died in the United States. If she was in Canada and wanted to go to an emergency room, she couldn't have got to the hospital. Period. So, Tim Hudak, I just say that leadership is somewhat questionable. These guys to all of a sudden play politics with an issue like supply doesn't make any sense. And the last point I'm just going to make is this. I checked this fact out yesterday. There has not been a case in the history of this province where a government has fallen on a supply motion or on an interim supply bill. It has not happened. And for Tim Hudak to try to say otherwise flies in the face of reality and speaks volumes about the Conservatives. They are about politics. They're about the politics of self-interest. They're about trying to create a fiscal crisis in order to do the things that to their political advantage. And if that's what Tim Hudak's leadership is all about, I say it fails the test. And yes, I will vote for supply along with the rest of our caucus.